5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, I'm Lauren.
And I'm Ernest.
And together we're L&E Explore Books.
Yes.
This is our first YouTube video. And so we're going to use this video as a way for you to get to know us a little bit better and to hear kind of what our BookTube is going to be about. So Ernest, I would love for you to share a little bit about why you love reading.
So I love reading because a lot of it's like a personal journey for me. Growing up, I had a hard time reading. It was so bad that when I got to the 3rd grade, I was reading at a 1st grade reading level. They were still doing like levels at the time. And it was like my book, I realized how different I was compared to like my friends and my other classmates, because while they were reading actually like bound books and, you know, with fancy covers, I was reading the books that you print out of a printer, kind of staple together. But luckily I was blessed with like amazing teachers and a great family that I was really able to learn to read and not really look to others as being like, if I'm not like them, then I guess I should give up. I was able to find books that allowed me to see myself and really explore my own identity, and that really allowed me to have passion in books. I was able to, the issues I would have to face, I could read a book and kind of see how it would play out and kind of learn that I can just be myself and be organic in that way. And ever since then, I just love reading, from fantasy to sports to, I just got into light novels from Japan because I'm such an anime fan as well. Just reading, just a great hobby of mine, and I just really deeply enjoy it. But Lauren, I pass it to you. Why do you love reading?
Yeah, so I definitely as a kid grew up in middle-class white suburban neighborhood, and I am definitely a more white presenting biracial individual. And as I grew up though, there were definitely moments and experiences I had where I was trying to learn and develop my own identity, but those weren't conversations we were super having at home or at school. And so I remember I was reading a lot of books about these characters who didn't always feel like they fit in, who were characters who were brave and strong and honest, even when things were difficult, and who were characters who lived in all these different perspectives and experiences. And so I felt like for me, reading was an opportunity to escape. Reading was an opportunity to feel like I wasn't alone, and reading was an opportunity where I was able to identify with heroes who, even if the way that they identified in the book wasn't exactly like me always, it was more like that I had these characters to look up to, and that I had these examples of what I wanted to imagine and dream for the world. So I've definitely always seen reading as an opportunity to escape, and I'm super passionate about bibliotherapy and the idea that books can create healing space because they can allow you to resonate and see experiences with other people. And so, yeah, reading for me has just always been kind of a part of my journey and my experience. I often felt like Belle from Beauty and the Beast, where I always had my nose stuck in a book, and I always bring like a book with me when I go places. And so if there was ever like an awkward lull in conversation, I just pull out my book.
Those bus rides. So what will make, like, what is our channel going to be about? Is it going to be about specific books, like a genre, saying like, hey, we're going to do nothing but fantasy, romance, or are we doing the most popular books, new releases? Like, what would you describe our channel to be?
Yeah, it's so funny whenever you ask that, because I'm like, oh my gosh, let me tell you all the things that are important to me. So I think for myself, something that's super important as I engage in this journey is making sure that we're able to highlight and recognize books from a wide variety of genres. I also think both Ernest and myself are educators, and so for us, it's really important that we're discussing books that can be accessible to children, young adults, to teenagers. I mean, really like expanding even in the age genres of where books go. But for me, I really want to make this channel a space where we can talk about books from a variety of experiences and spaces. I definitely want to make sure that we're highlighting people of color, that we're highlighting Black voices, we're highlighting Latinx voices, we're highlighting Asian voices, that we're highlighting way more specifically than that as well. I feel like that's kind of like
Yeah.
a broad, and I think it's really important that we recognize like communities within those identifiers or communities that don't exist within those identifiers, but really acknowledging just the diversity within our communities. I think also making sure that we represent queer authors in what we're reviewing, making sure that we're looking at debut authors, self-published authors, authors that have big publishing houses. And so really opening our eyes to a variety of ways that storytelling is shared. I think for me, I always want to make sure that we're honoring that storytelling can come in so many different ways and forms. And so I really don't want to be like one genre specific or say this is the type of book we only read.
Yeah.
Because that's just not true to my reading journey.
Definitely not.
When Ernest looks at my...
I challenged her per se, and I was like, don't you read a specific like genre of books? And then I looked through her Goodreads and every book she has been reading, because she said like she reads on according to how she feels or what.
Yeah, so I'm a mood reader for sure.
And all her books basically different. Some can be nonfiction, some can be poetic, some can be deeply naturalist. I didn't even know naturalist was a genre until some of the books that she read. So my wife is definitely very... she reads according to how she feels and what is really getting there. And I think that's going to be important to our channel, that we want to highlight voices that some people might not even look at. You might not think of this book as being something that you look because it might not hit young adult or be advertised for that, but can be very like eye-opening and, you know, deep, and maybe tell a story that you never thought you'd be interested in until you heard someone, you know, advertise it and kind of say, hey, you should check this book out if you're feeling the mood.
Yeah, I think that's so real. What are some things that you really want to bring to this BookTube space?
You kind of said earlier, like we both being educators. I just started student teaching, so this is my first year actually just being in the classroom, really helping on that. So I want my channel to be educational. I would like to read young student literature and talk about it and highlight good things, because I think as I was going through school, I realized how reading isn't really cherished as it was back then. You know, we're so sucked into technology and like watching videos, and sometimes that replaces things. And I've grown to just really love just sitting back, either physically reading a book or listening to a book, and how much value that is. So I want to highlight these voices of stories that I never really looked at, and the stories that was always like, I focused on always the popular ones or whatever was the most you know, being talked about. And I want to highlight voices that didn't get that praise, but are very loved and deeply books that should be, you know, seeing the spotlight. And hopefully I can learn some things myself. So I want our BookTube to not only be about us reviewing books and talking about it, but also to educate and talk about things and subjects that I might not be as knowledgeable in, and want to explore and make sure that I'm respecting the voices of people who are sharing their, you know, thoughts with me. I want to be I hope to be a writer one day and write, and I feel like from reading and being able to discuss it, I can learn from these writers who actually did something that I haven't been able to do, put pen to paper and create their own world or share a story that can be deeply personal, regardless if it's fictional or non-fictional, poetic, or just, you know, artistic in a way.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I'm like, we're really passionate about books, obviously, and just about reading as a form of learning, I think is super important to both of us as an ethic. So thinking kind of more about who we are as people, since we shared a little bit about our reading story, what are some like lenses or perspectives that you bring from your own personal experiences? So some people call that fun facts. I'm like, your lenses and perspectives.
For my lens, I bring mainly like I want to talk about, be vulnerable and be open about things. Starting out, like, I remember in school I would be teased because I didn't act black according to, you know, just what they perceived as black being. So books was almost like, I wouldn't say my escape, but allowed me to see that, you know, I really didn't have to be what people define me as. And, you know, even though sometimes I felt so bullied enough where I thought like I wasn't born with a playbook, and joked around, like, even when I was an adult, that I bought a book about being black that is exactly about someone else who experienced the same things as I did and how it felt for him. And yeah, I just want to be able to be vulnerable and talk about subjects that I wasn't as experienced in, because a lot of my ideas was I came to realize how much of your environment and community affected you. I was in the military for 7 years, and some of my ideals and beliefs at that time are totally different than what they are today. So I want to tackle tough subjects and be real about it, and actually grow and actually give space, because one big thing I think is true that some people don't think, regardless of how I feel and my beliefs in a subject, if I don't actually live and coexist in that existence of what is being portrayed, I don't think I have any right to say you're wrong, or whatever you're feeling isn't true, because I don't, believe or feel in that way. I didn't grow in that space. So I want to highlight those voices and give reason to actually say, hey, I don't know anything about this, but I want to read and grow and learn and, be an ally in that.
Yeah. I think that's super real.
And also important as an educator, because humanity is very unique and special and beautiful, and that's something that you got to highlight and let that be known. What about yourself?
Yeah, so I think for me, growing up, so my mom is white, and then my dad's family is Mexican. And I think for myself, I've had a lot of conversation about what does it look like to be a biracial individual? What does it look like to be a light-skinned person of color? What does it look like to not feel like you're enough in any sort of specific category? And so like me understanding identity has been a big piece of like what I love in literature, is characters that really grapple with identities or are growing in their identities. I bring the lens, so I'm a school counselor. This is my 3rd year of school counseling, and I school counsel 6th through 8th graders, so 11 to 14 is typically what I work with. And for me, it's so important that we embrace and recognize like mental health as part of this conversation in books, and how we portray characters, and like showing characters with a wide array of emotions, or allowing characters to really explore and learn and fail and grow. And I also think something that's really important to me is that we're highlighting stories, particularly of people of color, where it's not just like trauma, highlighting life and realness. And so we're making it less about like this is just this individual's experience, and more about the reality of a system that is unjust. And I think within that is thinking about, how am I every day in my actions and choices choosing anti-racism? How am I choosing equity? How am I making sure my students are deeply seen and deeply loved? And so when I'm reading books, I read books to see if it's a book I could recommend to a student for them to feel like they're deeply loved and deeply seen.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think about how powerful reading was for me, and how it really helped me through some difficult situations that I don't think I would have made it through them as well if I hadn't had a book experience, even to be able to like give language to some of the things I was feeling but wasn't sure how to say them. And so resonating with another person's experience is a really incredible part of books. I also love that for me, book reading is such a communal space. I love sharing books with people. It's one of my greatest joys to give book recommendations. I love being a part of book clubs. Some of the book clubs we're currently in right now is a feminist theology book club with my church community. I'm also a part of our book club through the Diversity Center alumni of the undergraduate that I was a part of. I also am a part of some book clubs with friends, which I've really loved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's just beautiful to be able to engage with people about books. Yeah, I think something really cool, part of why we started actually this channel, is one of our big goals in the future is to own our own independent bookstore. And so we really want to continue to build community and talk through books, because ultimately we don't want our bookstore to just be a place of like showing books, which is beautiful in of itself, but we want it to be a living and breathing like community where people feel supported and loved, and like they can talk about and grapple with hard topics together.
Sure. Yeah, and I just think just to add to that, is just when I was getting back with about how much we focused on like what we see and visualize, that there's certain things that can affect us, our mind and how we perceive the world, and sometimes the easiest thing to do to show how negative that is, or how that is just one lens, is to read a book. read a book about, there was an audiobook we listened to recently about black teenage boy from Canada who liked hockey and stuff. And that's something that when I was young, we didn't even think about hockey and how all these different cultures can coexist and actually be themselves. And this author wrote a story from his own perspective and made a character who, you know, if I was younger, I would never think that would be a thing that I could associate myself with, because that wouldn't be black according to people then. So really sharing these stories and actually giving recognition to these stories that can, you know, go against what we see as our reality. What is our reality isn't actually true, and we can be our own selves and stuff. I think that's very important.
Well, also, I'll put at the end of this video in our description, if we discuss any books, I'll make sure that we put what books they were in there.
And I think also when it comes to book reviews, we want to make sure that we highlight if there's anything that could be triggering for people, or anything that may affect you, any subjects that bring up without spoiling it. Because I can say one thing that's important, that just me going to college, I came to find out that some of the books I read and was fond of are like one of my favorite books that I'm going to reread and talk about one of these days is Catcher in the Rye. I really feel like that, you know, Holden really connected with me, and I really feel like I could see myself in him. But I came to see that a lot of those books that I loved and cherished were books that were like passed to me, but it was more like very Eurocentric. And I'd never read, it wasn't until college I realized I'd never read Writers of Color until a teacher gave it to me as a subject and say, hey, we're going to read this as actually class material, and how much some of my reading is just so school focused and not, you know, reading independently and going to these other authors. Because I think it is important that if you read a certain style of author, you look for that author's style. But if you read, you find an author of color and someone who isn't, you know, praised or highlighted, and you find their stories, you can, you know, open yourself to a new world and actually see all these great writers that may not be put in curriculum, but are great storytellers who are in the past and stuff. I learned of the Earthsea trilogy not too long ago, and that made this fantasy series about characters of color, and how that wasn't something I ever thought could be true. You know, I never thought about a fantasy story where a character is black or Native American and something like that. It's just great to see that those stories were prevalent and not something that have to exist in modern times.
Yeah, I think that I'm like resonating. I'm like, yes to all of that space and all of that experience. I definitely think that that's super important. Yeah, I think just like what we get out of books, right? And like what we lean towards, and what does it look like for us to like try books that we might not have tried. For sure. Like, that's why I love being in book clubs, because sometimes they challenge me to read books that I wouldn't necessarily have picked up on my own, but oftentimes is a book that I'm like happy to engage with. Yeah, I think that that's super important. Yeah, and I think that kind of like moving forward, we're going to try and do all kinds of different videos. I'm not going to promise any sort of format, because I think creativity is part of our joy, and because this is something that we're really doing as an expression of creativity, I really want to like try a lot of different things and explore. So there will definitely be episodes where it might just be me speaking, or it might just be Ernest speaking, and then there will likely be many episodes where we both together are dialoguing about different topics. But I would love to talk a little bit about what you're currently reading and what you're thinking are books kind of in the future that you would like to read.
For me right now, just with everything going on in America and how I've been feeling about my own identity as being a black man with everything going on, it made me think about books that I read when I was younger and other stories that I haven't heard from in the black lens. So I'm going to share like two books that I'm about to stream. But the first one was a book I remember always seeing in middle school, and I always passed it. But one day in high school, I finally saw it again. I was like, I'm just going to pick it up, because it was always advertised in our library, but it was never like talked about or anything. It was just one of those books that you put on top of the library shelf and just advertise that way. And that book is called Monster by Walter Dean Myers. Black guy's point of view who is going through the prison system right now. He's going through trial, and in order to cope through going through this trial, he decided to turn his trial into a movie script. So he's writing in the only notebook they gave him while being a prisoner and telling his story through that as if it's a movie. And he titles titles his script Monster because that is what they called him when in this case, this homicide case, that he killed someone, that he is part of a reason someone died in this robbery gone wrong scenario. So I wanted to reread this book because it's a book that I know I read, but I never, I don't recall it. And I just want to reread these things and talk about these tales because, just learning about the prison pipeline that we live in, and these resources that aren't really discussed, that I want to highlight and say, hey, just read these stories, these voices that you may not hear as often, and give it a chance and learn from point of views that I can recognize. One thing that I grew up in a very privileged lifestyle. I grew up with both my mom and my dad. I was able to have any of my issues I needed taken care of, helped and succeed. And some styles of behavior I would always deflect as saying that it's not my culture, it's not me because of where I was living. And I kind of realized that no matter what, when I walk out my house, I'm still a black man. No matter what socioeconomic class I might be in, that things can happen to me. And I need to recognize that, the world is hard and your identity does matter. And in order to change that and shape that, sometimes you got to share these stories and be vulnerable with people and not just sweep it aside and say, hey, it happens sometimes, but it's no big deal, because it can affect people differently. And I think that deeply matters. Do you want to share yours, or you want to?
Yeah, I can share. One? So for one of my book clubs right now, I'm reading a book called The Murmur of Bees. And this work is by Sofia Segovia. And it's such a powerful work about this young boy. His is just this incredible little boy who's found near a bridge, and bees follow him. He doesn't speak out loud, but like the way that he shares with other people and communicates is through his actions. And you get inside of like his mindset and perspective, and the perspective of other folks, both people who are trying to harm him and his beloved family. And you realize and learn about this young boy that he has these incredible gifts. And one of his gifts is being able to see things happening in the future. And because of that, he's always trying to bring good into the world and to stop evil or harm from happening to his family. And it's just this really beautiful portrayal of family. It's also a little eerie to read right now because it's talking about influenza in Mexico and just like literally people not listening to experts and like all of this like destruction that happened. So there's just some eerie
similarities,
parallels that I kept reading, and that wasn't like, this book was written several years ago, so it wasn't written specifically right now in this time, but that really resonated with me. And I just love seeing this story of this wonderful protagonist who is not like who you stereotypically would think would be like the character who's able to bring all of this goodness and grace into the world, but really does it in his own beautiful and powerful and unique way in communication also with the natural world with these bees. And so I've really enjoyed this read, and I'm about halfway through right now, and I'm hoping to finish it by tomorrow because my book club's meeting tomorrow at 4.
I'm hoping to read a mixture of fantasy. Some of my one-off videos might be just, sometimes I want a book that I don't have to think too much and can just relax and chill, almost like playing like a video game in a way. I love Japanese light novels. I just got into it. I've been reading a lot of Shield Hero, and I recently wanted to start reading another anime I love called ReZero's light novel. So I'm going to read some of those, and I'm going to look for other interesting stories that I haven't heard about and seen that was recommended to me from either Goodreads or some booktubers I had looked up. So after I read Monster, I was thinking of either reading The Long Way Down, which I'll talk to you about in a different video, and another book called The First 15 Lives of Harry August. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping, so feel free to share book recommendations. I'm always that person who's asking for book recommendations and has like many books that I could read next, but still love hearing recommendations, because it might be that recommendation, because I'm a mood reader, is the book that I actually decide is the right fit for me next. But I definitely, especially as we move into October, I love spooky season books. So I love anthologies of scary stories, or even like folklore. We'll definitely do an episode later about some of our favorite kind of thrillers or spooky stories, and so that's definitely something I want to read as well. But again, I say that now, and it could be a completely different book that I actually end up reading, depending on what my mood is for that.
When she finishes the story.
But absolutely. Well, we know that this video is a hearty video, so thank you for sticking with us to this point.
Yeah.
And we just really are excited to go on this journey with you. If you have more questions, ideas, suggestions, we are super open.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.